Hello and welcome. I'm Ron. This is Mike. And together we're going to show you how to replace that old toilet with that new toilet. But before we get into the details of today's workshop, Mike, why don't you kind of just run us through an overview?
Sure. We're going to cover a lot today. We're going to talk about the different parts of a toilet. We're going to give you the names of all the parts because, everybody is familiar with the parts of their toilet. You may not know the official name. So we're going to run through that to make sure that you understand kind of what we're referencing as we have this discussion. And then we're going to talk about different types of toilets because most toilets are basically the same, but there are some differences that you might find appealing. So we'll kind of go through that. And then, of course, we'll go through all of the steps of removing an old toilet and installing a new toilet.
And for more information on this and many, many other do it yourself projects, visit homedepot.com. Look for do it yourself projects and ideas, tons of how to videos and project guides on all sorts of projects.
Yeah, real quick, if you've never been to that part of our website, it's right at the top. There's a bunch of different links to different portions of the website, but it's a header at the top that actually says DIY projects and ideas. It is filled with a ton of DIY information. So check that out when you get a chance. Now, as far as the parts of the toilet, let's start at the top, the tank. You'll see one here. Now, obviously, when this toilet is being used, these two pieces are put together, but we've got them separate so we can talk about this. But the tank is the part at the top where the water is gathered and held before you flush the toilet. Know this, most toilets come with all of the pieces and parts already kind of connected or at least in the box. So you don't generally have to buy a lot of extra stuff. But we're going to start with the tank of the toilet.
Now, the one cool thing about that is what he just said is they come with everything. There's not a whole lot of adjusting that's going to be needed to do when you're actually putting in a new toilet. Next on the list is the flush valve and the overflow tube. These sit in the middle of the tank and they work together to bring water into the tank. And that overflow tube just keeps that excess water from overflowing out of the tank and all over that beautiful new floor.
Where you don't want it.
That's right.
Next is the fill valve. Now that's the device that actually refills the tank after it's flushed. It includes a float. If you've ever looked inside your toilet, there's a part that kind of floats up and rises as the water level rises. When it gets to a predetermined spot, it cuts off the flow of water. So that's how you determine how much water is filled in the tank, the float.
Next is the flapper. It's the rubber piece that is opened with the handle. Once flushed, it closes tightly to allow the tank to refill. Now, some toilets do not have a flapper. Instead, they have a rubber gasket that fits around the opening at the bottom of the tank.
Yeah, just so you know, they both kind of do the same thing. They both function basically the same. The flapper, you'll see it if you have one. It actually opens up and either covers or doesn't cover that opening to allow the water to flow into the bottom of the toilet. My toilets at home don't have a flapper. They have this round rubber gasket made out of the same material, but it fits down around and kind of circles the outer edges of that opening. So they both do the same thing, but you might have one or the other. Just if you're looking to replace one, let's say you're not replacing your toilet, but you've got a toilet that keeps running, it's probably one of those two things, either the flapper or the gasket. Just remove it, take it to the store to make sure you get the same kind that you need, and then replace it on your toilet.
It's super important to understand that there are universal fit flappers, but there are also flappers that are specifically designed for that particular model of toilet. So take that in consideration.
Right, even the gasket, there are actually different sizes. So again, you need to make sure you get the right size, not just the right type. Next up, we're going to talk about the bowl. Now, we talked about the tank. The bowl is the bottom half of the toilet. Now, this has fewer parts than the top part, but it's important when you're installing the toilet to know what's there. There's a toilet flange. That's going to seal underneath the toilet, between the toilet and the floor and the actual drain pipe. That's an area right there that kind of seals that gap. But it needs to be solidly connected at the bottom to keep the toilet stable.
And then, of course, we have the wax ring. You're going to hear the word wax ring, but it's kind of inclusive of wax ring or just the actual gasket itself. What I mean by that is sometimes they're going to be made out of beeswax, and then you can actually get them made out of a rubber to provide a seal. This is a bowl gasket. It secures the actual base of the toilet to the flange. Now, the wax ring or the actual gasket will always need to be replaced when installing that new toilet.
Now, one thing to know, the wax rings they've been around forever. It's what most people probably had growing up. These other types that are wax-free they're not new. They've been around for a while, but they're newer than these, obviously. The difference is the wax ring is pliable. It's wax, right? When you install the toilet, this kind of meshes and fills gaps and really seals that connection between the flange and the drain pipe and the toilet itself. The issue with these, it's not an issue, but the thing to be aware of is if you're installing the toilet and you decide that it's a little bit crooked, right? It doesn't feel level. If you pull it up, you've broken that seal that you made when this came in contact with the toilet. You can't necessarily reseal that. So that's why a lot of people are starting to use these.
I completely agree. That's what I've replaced all my wax rings in my home with these. And it's really because I can take the toilet off if I want to refinish my floor or change something out. I can take my toilet off, I can set it aside, I can do what I need to do, and I can use that same gasket and put the toilet back in place.
Right. And like Ron said, if you're replacing a toilet and you have a wax ring, you always have to replace this with a new one. Always. Not the case with the other. Now let's talk about types of toilets. There are two different toilet styles. There's the two-piece, like the one that you see here, where the tank and the top actually, or the tank and the bowl actually are separate pieces and are connected. So it makes it a little bit easier when you're replacing it because you can take it apart and move it a little bit easier. But there are also one-piece toilets where the tank and bowl are actually one continuous piece. There's no connection. There's no break between the two parts. The advantage of that is you don't have the chance of a leak. If your toilet is connected properly, you won't have a leak underneath the tank, but you could because it's a connection. So if that ever loosens over time, you could possibly have a leak there. That won't be the case with the one piece. And it's also a little bit cleaner because you don't have that gap in the middle.
One of the things to consider when you're trying to decide between a one piece or a two piece, well, one pieces are going to be a lot more expensive. They're also going to be heavier for an install, so it's definitely going to be a two-person install
Right.
versus just putting the bowl down and then putting the tank on the bowl. So
Yep.
those things are to be considered.
Also, if you're in a very, very small, like a guest bathroom or a hallway bathroom where you don't have a lot of space, the two-piece, that's probably an advantage because it's tough to remove at all the one-piece toilet because you don't have a lot of room to maneuver. But when you're trying to get it out of the bathroom, it might be easier to remove the tank from the top and remove that from the room and then come back and get the bottom half. Maybe a little bit harder if it's one piece, just physically fitting in and out of the room. Something to think about.
And then last but not least, kind of a less known type of toilet would be a wall-mounted toilet. Now, these definitely can be more expensive, mainly to install, Mike, and that's because you kind of got special needs when it comes to the installation because you want to have a reinforced wall. What that means is inside the wall, the typical stud itself's probably not going to be sturdy enough to handle the weight of that kind of toilet.
Right. There is another advantage to the wall-mounted toilet. First of all, it's more modern, more contemporary. So if that's the look of your home and that's the look you're going for, that might be a good option. But like Ron said, you absolutely have to make sure that it's connected well within the wall because it's got to support the weight of whoever happens to be using it. But there is an advantage in that it's easier to clean around that toilet. If you've got a toilet, a traditional toilet that sits on the floor, sometimes getting around it to clean is a little bit hard. You've got to bend over and reach. With the wall-mounted toilet, there is no base touching the floor, so it's a little bit easier to clean and keep clean that area underneath the toilet. Now, what about the shape of the toilet? You have two options here, round and elongated. Elongated measures usually up to 31 inches from the wall behind the toilet to the front of the bowl. And most people find these more comfortable because there's just more space. The round bowls extend about 28 inches from the wall to the front of the toilet. They're round in shape as opposed to a more oblong, elongated bowl. And again, most people just find the elongated bowl a little bit more comfortable.
So, elongated toilets, like Mike said, they're going to provide greater comfort when seated. Now, round bowls require a lot less space and they're good for small bathrooms. In fact, they're often called space saver toilets, and I have one in my half bath at home myself, where I have the elongated toilets in the other bathrooms, full baths in my house. So, in addition to that, we talk about the height of the toilet. Real kind of important to know that the standard height of a toilet is between 15 and 16 inches from the top of the seat to the floor. Then there's comfort height, or what we like to call chair height toilets. They're going to range from about 17 to 19 inches from the top of the seat to the floor. And they're really good, if you're having any kind of mobility issues or if you are a really tall person. Now, Mike, one more thing that customers need to consider before purchasing that toilet is going to be the rough in distance. What is rough in distance really mean? Well, simply put, it's the distance from the wall to the center of the drain or the flange. Now, you can't see the center of the drain when you have a toilet already there, but just know that it's going to be the center of the bolts on either side of the toilet. Now, standard distances today are going to be around what we call a 12-inch rough-in. But if you have an older home, you may have a 10-inch rough-in or even up to a 14-inch rough-in. So it's super important to make sure that you take the measurement. One more key thing to consider, make sure it's from the wall, not the baseboard. I'm going to say it again, the wall, not the baseboard, to the center of the drain, and that is going to get you your rough-in distance. Now, if you don't check, you're going to end up with a toilet that may not fit. Most codes, when we talk about clearance around the toilet, need at least 15 inches. You're going to measure that from the center of the toilet to either side, from any side wall or obstruction. Now, the National Kitchen and Bath Association recommends at least 32 inches, but there should also be at least 24 inches of clear space in front of the toilet. What does that mean? That means from the distance to the doorway or to the wall.
Now, one other option that you have when it comes to a toilet is a dual flush toilet. You may have heard that term. These are becoming more and more popular. They're super popular in Europe. You see them all over the place. You don't see them quite as much here in the States, but you're starting to see them more, and people like them in their homes because you have the option. It's called dual flush because it actually will flush two different ways. You can save a lot of water with the dual flush toilet. The small button, normally there's two buttons, a smaller button and a large button. The smaller button gives you a smaller flush. The larger button gives you a larger flush. So let's say you have, just a toilet tissue or something. You've blown your nose and you throw it in there. You don't necessarily need all this water to get rid of that. So you can use that lighter, smaller flush option and save water. A small button flush uses about a gallon of water to flush. The large button takes a little over a gallon and a half. So you can think about over time, the more you use that toilet, you're going to save a lot of money. And Ron, speaking of saving money, did you know that nearly 30% of a home's water use is the toilet? That's right, toilets use a lot of water. Toilets made in the US after 1992 use 1.6 gallons of water per flush, but toilets made before 1992 can use up to 7 gallons of water per flush. That's crazy. An efficient toilet can greatly reduce your home's water consumption and water bills, obviously. We recommend replacing any toilets installed before 1994. One more option is a touchless flush toilet. You can avoid touching the toilet at all because with a touchless toilet, there's a sensor. You literally just wave your hand past it and it flushes the toilet. So it avoids you having to touch the flush handle. Next up, we're going to actually walk you through the steps of removing an old toilet and installing a new toilet. Now, unless you're building a new home or maybe adding on a bathroom where there wasn't a toilet, you're obviously going to have to remove an old toilet in order to install a new toilet. We're going to walk you through all those steps now.
The first step is to turn off the water at the shutoff valve. This valve can be found either on the wall or the floor behind or beside the toilet. It controls the flow of the water into the supply line and then into the toilet tank.
The tank, again, is the upper section of the toilet where water used for flushing is stored. The bowl is the lower section where the water flows and swirls to complete the flush.
Next, flush the toilet to drain all the water from the tank and the toilet bowl. Since you've turned the water off at the valve, the tank will not refill. Use a plunger to force any remaining water down the drain line and remove any remaining water from the tank with a sponge and a bucket.
Any small amount of water left in the bowl at this point won't spill out as long as the bowl is left upright while being removed.
Disconnect the supply line with an adjustable wrench. It's connected to the water pipe, bringing the water into the bathroom, as well as the toilet fill valve at the base of the toilet tank.
If the line has never been removed or has been connected for an extended period of time, it might be a little hard to loosen at one or both of the connection points. Just use a good penetrating catalyst to break down any corrosion that may exist.
Be sure to keep the water pipe secure while trying to loosen the supply line at the valve. You do not want to loosen or damage the water pipe or its connection inside the wall or the floor in the process of trying to loosen the supply line connection.
And Ron, this is a really important point because if you're not thinking about how that water pipe is connected inside the wall, and it's easy to forget about because you never see that. But if you're trying to loosen and remove the supply line and it's really tight, if you just go grabbing it with a wrench and jerking it, trying to get it loose, you could be loosening that pipe inside the wall, causing a leak further down the line. So that's why it's really important to secure the pipe while you're loosening the supply line to make sure you don't loosen something you don't mean to. Now, there will be a small amount of water left in the supply line when you remove it. So you'll want to have something on hand to wipe up any water that spills out.
If you're working alone, it may be easier to separate the tank from the bowl. Lifting both pieces together can be difficult for one person. Also, know that some toilets feature that one piece construction that we mentioned before, in which case the tank and the bowl are not separate pieces and obviously cannot be separated.
Disconnect and remove the tank from the bowl by removing the bolts from the bottom of the toilet tank with an adjustable wrench. The tank bolts travel from inside the toilet tank to below the bowl. Now, it may be necessary to hold the top of the bolt within the tank while removing the nut below the back of the bowl.
Remove the tank by lifting it straight up. If you feel resistance, twist the toilet from side to side as you lift. This will work the flush valve gasket found between the tank and the bowl free from the bowl.
To unbolt and remove the toilet bowl from the floor, pop the toilet bowl caps using a screwdriver if necessary. Use a pair of pliers or an adjustable wrench to remove the nuts and washers on the bolts that secure the bowl to the floor.
If you find the nuts are rusted in place, you can use a penetrating spray to loosen the nuts. Even if this doesn't loosen the nuts enough to remove them completely, just a few turns will create enough space at the base of the bolts below the nuts to allow you to use a hacksaw to cut the bolts off. You can also use any type of multi-tool with a metal cutting blade in order to make that happen. Now, your new toilet will come with replacement bolts.
Check to see if your toilet bowl has been caulked around the base where it meets the floor. If it has, you might need to use a utility knife to score through the caulk seam. Know that on your new toilet, you should avoid caulking around the entire base. Now, Ron, let's talk a little bit about that because generally there are two schools of thought. Some people will say you absolutely should caulk around the entire base of your toilet. Some people say you should never caulk around the base of your toilet. We kind of land in the middle. There's a reason you want an opening somewhere. If you develop a leak under your toilet and it is caulked all the way around, there's no way for that water to get out. So it could be there for a really long time before you realize it and cause some real damage to your floor. So what we suggest is for a nice finished look, caulk the sides and the front of the toilet, the part that you see the most, but don't caulk in the back. First of all, you never see that, so it doesn't really matter, but it allows an exit for water if you do develop a leak. So you want to caulk some of the toilet, but not all of the toilet base.
And I got to tell you something. In most cases, there is going to be a slight little gap. Your toilet base is never going to sit really flush to your floor. So caulking is going to give it that finished look that you are looking for.
Now, gently rock the toilet back and forth until you work it free and can lift it. Move it to the side and expose the old wax ring or whatever else you may have there.
Like we said before, a wax ring is that gasket made from beeswax, or it can be a synthetic material or rubber. Its purpose is to create that waterproof seal between the toilet flange and the opening of the drain pipe in the floor, and it prevents water and gases from escaping.
After removing the toilet bowl, check the status of the old toilet bowl bolts in the flange located at the floor drain. If you cut rusted bolts off in the previous step, those bolts will need to be replaced at this point with the new bolts that come with your new toilet.
If the bolts weren't rusted in place and are in good shape, you can leave them in place and reuse them, or you can replace them. Either approach is fine. The flange is there to create a connection between the floor and the toilet and provide a connection point for the hardware found in the base of the toilet.
Use a putty knife to remove old wax rings and wipe away any remaining wax with a damp rag or sponge. At this point, you'll want to stuff a rag into the open line. This will prevent sewer gases from venting into your home, but it also keeps tools from falling into the hole. You'll obviously remove that rag later before installing the new toilet.
Inspect the flange. If the flange is cracked or broken, you can replace it or you can use a flange repair ring. Most common types are available in one or two-piece designs. They're designed to fit over an old, damaged existing flange to ensure a good connection for the new toilet.
So Ron, one note on that. If you remove your toilet and you see a little bit of damage, that's probably a situation where you don't necessarily have to remove and replace the flange, but you can use a repair kit to, just further secure it. But if you find a lot of cracks or there's a lot of damage, in that case, you really do want to remove it and replace it with a new one. Now, again, based on the severity of your damage, if you're going to replace it, just snap a picture of the flange and show it to one of our plumbing associates for advice on which approach maybe is right for you or which one is the best fit for your toilet.
The funny thing is, there are different approaches. This is a fix-it ring. You can get these. It attaches to the old. Okay, it attaches to the old. Maybe you guys can check that out. There are different versions of that. Here's a full flange piece, and it's going to fit over top the existing flange and screw into place to provide an awesome seal and an awesome connection point. And then last but not least, well, not really last, but I got two other ones here. This is the two-piece version. It's going to fit side to side for you. And this is one that you would actually cut the top piece of this off. You'd cut this off, flush with the floor, and then you would put the new one down inside the old drain. It would fit right down in there, and then it would screw right down into the floor again. So there's
Just to be clear,
lots of different options.
you're not suggesting cut this off. You're saying cut off the old flange and replace it with this entire piece.
That's correct.
Right. Just want to make sure
That is correct.
Now, after placing the new bolts in the flange and removing the rag from the drain pipe, you're ready to install the new toilet.
You have two options for placing the new wax ring if you're utilizing it. You can rest the new toilet bowl on its side on a padded surface to protect both the floor and the toilet, and attach the replacement wax seal to the bottom of the bowl. The benefit here is that you can be sure that the ring is in proper position when placing the toilet over the flange.
However, the more popular option is to place the wax ring in position on the flange on the floor before you lower the toilet bowl into place. Just be aware that the thickness of your floor will dictate the thickness of the wax ring needed. And Ron, just to make sure that everyone's clear, we're talking about two options of doing the same thing. The wax ring is that thing that we talked about earlier between the toilet and the flange. The problem for some people with placing it in the floor is they can't really see it, especially if they're doing it by themselves when they place the toilet over it. So it's sometimes, maybe difficult to get that in the right position. The idea is turn the toilet on its side, put the wax ring on the toilet before you do that. But like you have mentioned, sometimes it falls off. So there's pros and cons to both, but just so you're clear, both are fine. Just some people prefer one or the other.
Absolutely. Now, for instance, if you have thick tile and it's been added to your bathroom since the original toilet was installed, a thicker wax ring may be required.
Now, make sure that you've removed that rag that you placed in the drain pipe. Now you can place the toilet bowl onto the flange, aligning the bolt holes in the base of the bowl with the bolts in the flange.
Now, if it helps, you want to go ahead and grab the bowl by the inside rim instead of the outer edges. This is going to give you a better grip and more control as you lower it. Then press down to set the seal. Be really careful not to move or tilt the toilet after setting the wax seal on the flange because you could break the seal, which will result in a future leak.
And real quick, what we're talking about, I'll just show you here. As you can see on the side of this toilet, it's a pretty smooth surface and there's really no edge there. You can pick it up from the outside. It's just a little bit harder, especially again, if you're doing it by yourself. But as you know, if you've ever looked in your toilet, there is a rim here and there's just more to hold on to. So it's easier to pick it up from the inside. Now, to secure the toilet, place a washer and nut on each toilet bowl bolt and evenly tighten the nuts onto the bolts. Be sure and alternate from one side of the toilet to the other as you tighten the nuts a little bit at a time.
This keeps the pressure even on both sides and prevents loosening of the seal of the wax ring. Also, be careful not to over tighten the nuts and crack the porcelain bowl.
And this is really, really important. If you're doing it by yourself, again, we keep going back to that, you might be tempted to do one side and then transition to the other side. You don't want to do that because you want to make sure that the toilet is sealed on that wax ring as it gets tightened down. So if you do it on one side, it might loosen or undo the seal on one side or the other if you do one side at a time. So that's why it's important. In a perfect world, you would do both at the same time, but that's hard to do. So you just want to alternate back and forth, tightening the bolts so the toilet is lowering on both sides at about the same rate.
Even pressure.
If the bolts extend too far over the top of the washers and nuts, cut off the excess with a hacksaw. Know that some newer models of toilets have taller bolt caps, which prevents the need to shorten the bolts.
You know what's so really good about the hacksaw? We talked about that a little earlier when we're moving. Sometimes you might actually have to cut that old stuff off. So those mini hacksaws are really, really good to have in your toolkit. Now you're ready to attach the tank to the toilet bowl. If it's not already attached, install the tank to the bowl gasket on the base of the flush valve and insert the tank bolts and washers from inside the tank.
So just to be clear, we've talked about a couple of different kinds of gaskets. There is a connection point where the toilet meets the floor, but there's also a connection point where the tank meets the bowl. On a lot of toilets, that gasket that's needed is already attached. Sometimes it's not. I think for the most cases, for new toilets, it's almost always attached. But there is a connection point there, so there needs to be a gasket to prevent leaks.
Now, in addition to this, make sure that we understand this is on a two-piece toilet.
Right.
On a one-piece toilet, you're not even gonna have to do this because the tank is already gonna be attached.
Yeah. There's no seal. It's not two parts. It's one solid toilet. Now, on this toilet, you can see that the gasket, again, came already attached to the tank. You didn't have to worry about that. Place the tank onto the bowl, aligning the shank of the bolts with the holes in the bowl. Secure the tank to the bowl by alternately tightening each tank bolt until the tank pulls down and comes in contact with the bowl. So the same concept that we talked about with tightening the toilet itself to the floor, you want to do the same process when you're tightening the bolts that connect the tank to the bowl. You want to alternate back and forth to make sure that you're evening it or tightening it on an even surface.
You know, Mike, it's funny that that particular process when you're alternating screws or nuts or bolts should be used with just about everything that we tighten down. You never want to over tighten one side versus the other side because it's not going to create a proper seal just in just about anything that we're going to do or build.
And I think customers sometimes want to know, well, how do I know if I'm over tightening? How tight is too tight? Basically, you don't want to tighten it to where it's tough and then keep going. So you want to get it nice and snug, but that's it. The only reason you would want to tighten it more is if you over time, find out that it's not quite secure enough, then you can maybe tighten it a bit more, but you don't want to start tightening it too much. Just get it where it's nice and snug and leave it alone.
For me, it's been all about once it's down and it's secure, and I sit down on it, and it's not moving, then I know that it's actually in place really well. So at this point, we want to reattach the supply line to the exposed portion of the fill valve that's sticking out of the bottom of the tank and to the supply valve that's coming out of the wall or the floor.
We suggest replacing your old supply line with a new one at this point, especially if it hasn't been replaced in a while. Now, test the toilet for leaks. Slowly turn on the water at the shutoff valve and allow the tank to fill.
Flush the toilet and focus on the base of the toilet at the point in which the tank and the bowl meet. Now, you can use a leak detecting dye, which you'll find in our plumbing department, that will make seeing those leaks much easier.
And that's an important point because you might think, a leak, I'm going to see a leak. But if the leak is a really small leak and a little bit of water comes out, water is going to be clear. And on that white surface of the toilet, or it could be another color, I guess, but it's really hard sometimes to see that water. If it's a color, it's going to stand out a lot more. So you might have a really, really faint leak. You might miss it if you don't use the leak. And Ron, I know that you had an experience with this.
I sure did. So, was replacing my mother's toilet, wanted to do a repair on it first. Come to find out, when she had her flooring put in and they removed the toilet and put the toilet back, they did exactly the wrong thing when it came to the bolts. They over tightened the bolts and they ended up cracking the tank. Now, I couldn't see that. It was a hairline fracture in the tank, and I could not figure out where the water was coming from. I added some of that leak detecting dye and I was able to see the little blue line coming out of the side of the tank. And once you've actually cracked your tank, you're done.
Yeah, you're done.
It's time for a new toilet.
Yep. Now, be aware that most two-piece toilets do not come with a seat. Some do and some don't. So just make sure that when you purchase it, you check the seat if there's a seat included. If it's not, those are purchased separately. Just be sure that the one that you choose matches the shape of the toilet you've selected and it will fit. Secure the new seat and the lid to the bowl following the manufacturer's instructions. And Ron, when you go in the store, if you look online, you'll see lots and lots and lots of toilet seats, but they all fall into just two categories and they line up with the bowl shape that we talked about earlier, round and elongated. So while you'll see a lot of options in each of those categories, they're universal. So if you have a round bowl, any round seat will fit. If you have an elongated bowl, any elongated seat will fit. Just make sure you get the right shaped toilet seat to match your toilet.
One final tip to think about when you're dealing with a toilet seat. It's going to be a little bit strange, but everybody goes by the premise lefty loosey, righty tight. And this works in just about everything that we do, except for the toilet seat. The toilet seat is going to be reversed. You're going to tighten it up going to the left, not the right.
It's because it's secure from the bottom and it's upside down.
That's correct.
So if you're looking at your toilet upside down, you're doing it the right way, but you're not. You're standing upright. So that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. But with that, the toilet installation is complete. Now, we do want to quickly talk about some of the tools that you'll need. There's not a lot of tools needed for this. It's pretty basic, but there are some things that you'll need.
Well, the very first thing is that adjustable wrench. You're going to need that adjustable wrench, crescent wrench, adjustable spanner wrench, because you're going to need to be able to place it over the actual toilet bolt or closet bolts in order to get them off. You can also use an open-ended wrench in order to get them off. Whatever you have as far as that. I like adjustable because you can use it for lots of different things. Here's a little tip for you. A lot of times people have a problem with this moving. So when I set it in place, Mike, I take a little piece of duct tape and put it on the back so it won't roll when I'm trying to, take things off or tighten things down.
Now, the next thing you'll need is a screwdriver. If you can remember, when we were loosening the bolts on the connections between the tank and the bowl, we had a screwdriver inside the tank to hold that in place as we loosened it on the bottom, to hold that in place while you're doing that.
Scraper. I like this because I could use it for lots of different things.
Multi-tool.
It's a multi-tool, so you use it to scrape off the old wax. Real good to have.
And then, of course, just a bucket to catch the water that we talked about. When you're emptying out the tank in the beginning of the process, a bucket and some gloves.
Protect your hands. It's going to get a little messy down there, so you're definitely going to want some gloves.
And then, of course, lifting the toilet can be hard. So you might want to have an extra set of hands to help you out. Not only is there a lot of lifting, and toilets can be a little bit heavy, and it's kind of awkward to bend over and pick these up. You can do it. This is absolutely something one person can do, but it's going to be a lot easier if you've got a second pair of hands, especially if you're in a smaller bathroom, like a guest bathroom or a hallway, like an entry hall bathroom, where you don't have a lot of room to maneuver. It might be nice to have somebody helping you get that out of there as you're replacing it. Now, what about all the parts? We talked about tools and we mentioned a lot of things throughout the conversation, but just as a quick recap, what are the other things they're going to need?
Wax ring for sure. It's going to come with it in the kit, but sometimes you might need a thicker one. You never want to reuse a wax ring. They're super inexpensive and they should always be replaced.
Next up is the flange, and that's the part at the bottom that is the seal between the floor and the toilet itself. When you remove the old toilet, just check to see if your old flange is damaged. If it's not, you're fine. But if it is, this is the time to replace it.
Next would be flange bolts. Now they're going to come in the kit with the actual wax ring in most cases. We call them closet bolts. They're like little T-shaped bolts. You should always use new bolts when replacing your toilet.
And toilet supply line. You know, if the one that you have is really old, if it's frayed, or if it just hasn't been changed out in a long time, it's a good opportunity to go ahead and change that, because one of the places that people run into trouble as far as a leak, if it's not in the actual body of the toilet itself, it might be in the supply line. It's going to be one of those two places. So it just makes sense to go ahead and change it while you got all these parts disconnected anyway.
And with all those different types that are out there today, you just don't know what to do. Bring the old one in, and our Home Depot associate will be happy to make sure that you get the right one.
Yeah, and something else to consider, there are supply lines that can detect a leak and shut themselves off, right? So if you're out of town on vacation and you have a supply line problem, it's going to run the whole time you're gone. So two things, consider getting one of those leak detecting supply lines. The other trick is to turn off your water for your toilet when you're out of town. I do this always. When I travel, I always turn the water off, because I have a coworker that one time went on vacation and came back and their toilet had leaked the entire time they were out of town, and it made a mess and it really damaged their floor. So something to think about.
That's an awesome tip.
Yep.
Toilet seats.
Yep.
Some toilets don't include them whenever you buy the toilet, so just be aware. Make sure that you're reading the actual package.
And just make sure you check, because a lot of people just assume that a toilet seat is part of the toilet. It physically isn't, but it might be included, it might not. So just make sure you check that. So that's the entire process of removing and installing a toilet. But what if your installation run does not go as smoothly as ours did? We didn't really run into a lot of problems in ours, but you might.
So there are lots of things to consider. Murphy's always going to raise his ugly head in every project. That's one thing, after being in project after project for years, I've realized that you always got to kind of expect the worst and hoping for the best.
Hope
but
for the best.
expect
Expect
the
the
worst.
worst.
So problem number one, what if the bolts can't be removed, right? Well, we've shown you the PB blaster, taking a little bit of lubricant on there, trying to break that corrosiveness down. It's a mixture of rust. It's a mixture of hard water. There's all kinds of things that cause that those bolts to kind of get locked down. Worst case scenario, we're going to want to go ahead and try to cut them down. Now, Mike, if you can't get the toilet up enough off the bottoms to give you some room to use that hacksaw or that multi-tool to cut that off, if you're not keeping the toilet, as a last resort, get yourself a little claw hammer, smash the toilet at the bottom. Just make sure that when you're removing that stuff, you have got gloves on, because porcelain can get really sharp, and make sure that none of that extra broken toilet falls down into the actual flange.
And goggles.
Oh,
If you're breaking that toilet into pieces, you want to make sure that you have some goggles on. But just to make sure that you understand, we're talking about at the bottom, the bolts that hold the toilet to the floor. Now, if those have never been moved, sometimes they just won't budge. So the first thing is to get them moving. That's where the PV blaster penetrating catalyst can come into play. It will loosen it a bit. But even if you get it loose and it's now moving, sometimes you can't get it all the way off. So that's what you're facing. If the bolt won't move at all, that PV blaster will help get it moving. If you can't get it all the way off, if you can just get it loose a bit in order to get the hacksaw underneath the bolt to cut it, then you're in good position. So, and like Ron said, the last resort is to bust that toilet around there, because you're probably not keeping it anyway. So it doesn't hurt to break it into parts. But another thing you want to check, depending on where you live, just leaving your old toilet out on the street, they may not pick that up. So you may want to check with your municipality or city, whoever picks up your trash, to make sure that that's okay. If they don't, you may want to break it up and have it in a bag or something anyway.
that's a great point. Another thing, it's not necessarily a showstopper, but often happens. It's happened to me quite a few times. Is sometimes I just forget to drain the water out of the toilet. Worst case scenario, I'm picking the toilet up, I'm taking it out to the garage or wherever I'm putting it, water gets kind of sloshed all over me. Just make sure that you take that sponge. Maybe you can get a little what do you call those things? Like the little
Extractor.
yeah, little we sell these little extractor things that you can actually suck the water out of it. If that's something that interest you.
Yeah, and like we talked about, when you use a plunger to force that water down the drain to get most of it out of the bowl, and then use the bucket and sponge to get the water out of the tank, there's still going to be a little water left maybe in the bowl at the bottom. So if you keep the toilet upright, it won't come out because it's kind of caught in that trap at the bottom. But again, the more of the water you take out as you're removing it, the better off you'll be.
So here's my favorite one. Failing to measure for your new supply line. Here's the deal. You're replacing the toilet and you might have went from a space saver,
Right.
right, to a chair height or a comfort height type toilet. And when you do that, guess what? The length of space from the toilet tank to the actual supply valve has changed. You want to make sure that you have enough because you're going to get to the very end and then you're going to want to go to do that. And you're going to realize that it's not long enough. And you have to go get another one.
Right. And that's it's important because this is the last thing you'll do. And it's the last thing you want to forget about because you've done this whole process. This is the last thing you're going to connect and it doesn't reach. So just make sure that you measure that new distance before you buy a new supply line. Now, also, the lid. This is something that you might not think about. When you're installing your new toilet, there's the lid on the top. It's not connected, right? You may forget about that as you're moving it around. If you tip that toilet, that lid's going to fall off and it's going to break. So just make sure that you take the lid off and set it to the side. It's not important during the install. Go ahead and go through all the steps and then add that at the end because you don't want that to fall off. It's easy to forget about that.
Now, we've said this a few times already. I'm just going to go ahead and re-emphasize the importance of not over tightening the nuts and the bolts. You can always tighten them down a little bit as needed. Do not get crazy with that. You get crazy with it, you end up breaking your toilet, and then you got to go out and get another one because once you break these things, there's no going back.
Nope. Now, Ron, what about at the end of the install? You've tightened your nuts, everything is set, but you end up with a little bit of a leak around the base of the toilet. What do you do?
Well, the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try to tighten the bolts down a little bit more to see if that compresses the toilet. Now, here's the trick. The trick is if you're using a wax ring, have someone sitting on the toilet. Literally have that second person sitting down on the toilet, and then that's going to compress it enough to where you can tighten it down a little bit.
Right.
That should take care of it. If it doesn't take care of it, you're going to have to remove the toilet because something happened. Maybe whenever you were putting it over the wax ring, it wasn't completely centered and it did not get a proper seal.
Right. So that's where that wax ring seal is so important. We talked about it a couple of times. Once the toilet makes contact and that seal is created, there are things that can break that seal. If you loosen or if you tighten one side too much, you can loosen that a bit. So it's another reason why you want to go back and forth as you're tightening those bolts. But again, like Ron said, if you can't tighten it and eliminate that leak, you're going to have to remove the toilet and check because there's something going on where that seal is underneath the toilet.
Yes. So with all that being said and done, that pretty much covers how to remove, how to select, and how to replace your toilet. We spent a lot of time with you today. On behalf of myself and of course Mike here, what do you got to say to the folks out there?
I just want to say thank you for joining us. We hope you got a lot out of this. We hope that you feel empowered to go and take on this project. Good luck with the project. And of course, thank you for shopping at the Home Depot.